So I want to talk about education today, and it is a positive topic compared to everything else I was going to talk about. But there's some interesting side twists to my brief comments today. I've been a lifelong teacher. I just retired after 45 years of educating, mostly on a collegiate level. My mother was a lifelong school teacher and administrator, and my daughter's an 8th grade history teacher. And I've spent the last 2 years and the last year prior to retiring working more and more online, as we all have been forced to do because of the coronavirus in particular. And I taught my last course a few months ago, and it was all online. But my real experience in teaching in the age of COVID has been somewhat forced upon me by a job that I just took, being a tutor for my 7-year-old grandson and his first grade Zoom lessons. So when I say this is really from the front lines of the digital frontier of education, it really is. Mastering first grade arithmetic was hard enough 60 years ago for me. Doing it all online now has proven quite a challenge all the way around, especially with my 7-year-old is constantly telling me things like, "You're super old, Papa, so you get tired and confused, right?" Or when I say something brilliant, he says, "Yeah, but you probably learned that from me." So I am learning a lot on this job. What I'd like to do today is reflect on the meta perspective of the teaching experience in a way that I wasn't able to do when I was teaching full-time on the collegiate level. Because I'm seeing the direct tangible results of the pedagogies, what works and what doesn't. I see it every day with my grandson, and I talk about it every day with my granddaughter, or my daughter rather, who again is an 8th grade teacher, history teacher, teaching all online, also teaching PE online. She's had to substitute for PE courses, and I've been watching her do that as well. So I want to put a little context into my comments here preliminarily, starting with Marshall McLuhan, and a quote from him from Understanding Media. The final chapter, one of the final chapters of the book starts out, "A newspaper headline recently read, 'Little Red Schoolhouse Dies When Good Road Built.'" And McLuhan goes on to say that one-room schools with all subjects being taught to all grades at the same time simply dissolve when better transportation permits specialized spaces and specialized teaching. That's where we're at now with our education environment across the country. We now have millions of specialized spaces for teaching and learning, primarily out of people's homes. What McLuhan described back then, again, illustrates where we're at today, but it gets really amplified through the lens of Neil Postman and many of his works. I want to mention a couple of things from him, again, to set some context here. Besides being one of our great public intellectuals of the 20th century, Postman was first and foremost a teacher of the English language. He loved language, and words were the centrality of everything that he did. Lance Straight, in Amazing Ourselves to Death, his wonderful 2014 book, outlines in the early chapters much of Postman's earlier pursuits, in which he says that Postman's central argument in his early work was that the English curriculum in elementary and secondary schools could be improved through the incorporation of linguistics and semantics, as well as the study of the new languages, in which he was referring to new media technologies. As Lance says, Postman was not denying that television is educational, just that it has a curriculum and an agenda of its own. Postman's work in those early years and all of his early books went on to found what we now call as media literacy. And by 1985, and his book Amusing Ourselves to Death, he began to really focus in on what he saw as the dichotomy, the problem with a technocratic society taking over our educational system. He, especially in Amusing Ourselves to Death, talks about the Sesame Street aspect of our educational landscape, in which when Sesame Street got introduced into everyone's homes across the country, teaching kids the alphabet, it was thought that this was going to be the new model of education. And it has become that in so many ways. Of course, what Postman was really concerned about was that there's no social interaction within that space. Television is a very private reserve. It's not a public space for public interaction. And that'll be the main theme that I'll get to in just a few minutes. In 1988, in his book, Conscientious Objections, Postman says that I propose that we abandon our vague, seemingly arrogant, and ultimately futile attempts to make children intelligent and concentrate our attention on helping them avoid being stupid. Words that I highly echo right now, since it seems like much of the world today is designed to make us stupid or at least confused. In 1992, in Technopoly, Postman talks at length, I'm not going to go into the details, but the importance of the sensorium, senses. They fire all the time, and we need to be present in this sensorial environment if we're truly going to be interactive in the environment with all aspects of it. And then these levels of sensibility are lost within the two-dimensional framework of flatland and our computer screens. By the time we get to 1996, Postman's book, End of Education, says that essentially we have two problems in our schools. The first is engineering, technical problems, and the second is metaphysical. How do we get people to actually be affected by the things they learn? How are they a different person at the end of their learning experience? So these were sort of on my mind as I entered into my first days of teaching or being with my grandson in his first grade Zoom lessons. So first, some specific problems that I noticed in the Zoom lessons. Lots of technical problems across the board. Now, there's 30 students in the class, and there's 2 sessions a day, and I don't know how any teacher can teach 30 students online. It's amazing. And when you look at the gallery images of all of the students, you know, all 30 are all lined up, and you scroll through and look at them, and none of them are paying attention. Their fingers are up their nose, they're eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, they're running around in circles chasing the dog. They're doing everything but seemingly watching what's going on. Now, a part of the problem is technologically, digitization, pixelization, buffering problems, all of these technical things get in the way. Then you have human errors. The segues between technology modules and content modules are at best cumbersome. There's no easy transition from one theme to another. It seems like there's always this long delay that messes up the flow. Microphone placement. If the teacher isn't close enough to the microphone, suddenly you can't hear what he or she is saying. If the kid is mumbling and not close to the microphone, you can't hear what they're saying. Sometimes it takes a kid 30 seconds or more just to figure out how to turn the microphone on or off. Sometimes video drops out, all of these technical problems. But then there's also general problems that I've noticed. Differences in learning environments for the various kids involved. Some kids are alone with minimal support, maybe a babysitter in the house. Some, like my grandson, is lucky to have an individual tutor there with him, helping him, guide him through stuff. Some kids are in learning pods, obviously at a babysitter's house with maybe 5, 6, 7 other kids, all in different parts of the house on their various Zoom sessions with someone walking around kind of making sure everything's working right. Then you have just other people just there with family members helping them out. You also can tell a lot about people's environments in their homes, and some people have very elaborate environments. Some kids, you can tell, have very Spartan environments. And you could see the stratification of not just learning types and learning levels, but also of socioeconomic backgrounds as well. The asynchronous parts of the teaching really are quite wonderful, though. While the classroom is a sensorial environment is important, and again, I'll get to that in just a moment, the asynchronous stuff that the teachers are doing really work well. The Sesame Street stuff works when it's not the only thing that they're doing. After we finish our Zoom sessions, Lucas usually has about 2 hours of work to do before his afternoon session. And all of it's asynchronous online. And he loves it. He's watching videos, singing songs, doing incredible artwork, all online, posting it all up there and stuff. And it's wonderful. It's everything Sesame Street was intended to be. It's the good part of the mediation of schools. The problem is there's no social context behind any of it. Whenever the teacher tries to infuse that into what she's doing, it ends up being a disaster. Again, you have all these technical problems that get in the way, user errors and stuff, that really deflect away from any kind of direct discourse going on. When I talked to my daughter about her experiences in the classroom, she said that three things really were critical for her in her observations in doing online teaching. On the positive side, it's forced teachers to up their game with technology. Most teachers in elementary school were deathly afraid of technology in the classroom, and has forced them to up their game. But what didn't work are two things. One, the non-conversational, non-didactic, non-Socratic part of the classroom experience that was brought about through the other part, which was terrible for them, and that's the lack of socialization. They desperately want to be with other kids, and my grandson says it all the time, he misses his friends. I was struck by a lot of the things that Corey mentioned last night in his presentation of the 7 lessons from Lee Thayer, but 3 things in particular I wanted to kind of concentrate on here just briefly. The first one was his first concept of questions are important, not answers. And I think one of the nice things about a blend of synchronous and asynchronous education is it forces a lot of stuff to be done offline where questions become critical. The problem is you need someone there helping motivate and initiate the questioning. That's my job. And I'm really not the sage on the stage. I'm the guide on the side, encouraging Lucas to come up with good questions, which he does. It's been wonderful. The downside is a lot of the kids have a real hard time coming up with questions when they're on their own. And I think that's being lost in the online experience. The knower and the known are inseparable was another one of the ideas brought forward by Corey last night. And there is a weird disconnect when you're in this classroom environment online, and yet much of the time you're watching yourself on the screen, more interested in you rather than what's going on, rather than what's being known. I'm looking at me and wondering who I am and trying to know myself. It's a weird dichotomy, but I can see in the little 7-year-old mind, there's this, he knows he's online with his friends, but he's still trying to understand what it means socially to be here while everyone else is there, and how do we come up with collective knowledge in this environment where we're separated like that. And the final thing that I was struck last night by Corey's presentation was the idea that what makes people who they are is who you are when you're with them. And it goes back to that socialization, that it's one thing to talk about civics in the first grade classroom, to talk about how we should model responsible behavior and all. But then it's another thing to go out in the schoolyard and have to actually carry this out. And they're missing all of that stuff. So there's no reinforcement of these abstract ideas of kindness and friendship and sharing and all of those kinds of things. The end result is that I'm afraid that people like Betsy DeVos and others are going to look at this educational environment as the new normal. Shunting ourselves faster and faster into cyberspace, losing the connectedness and the high touch components of a sensorial environment in the classroom, and it's only going to further exacerbate the problems that we're having in terms of our uncivil discourse and all of the problems that we're seeing with things like fake news and all the rest of the stuff that we're dealing with in the contemporary age. I want to end with one final little quote here that Illich claims that the hidden curriculum of schooling is dependent on the institution of the school. And right now our schools are in a world of trouble, and we need to marshal our resources into our educational systems to prevent this kind of takeover by the digerati as they try to make this the new norm for us. That's it. Thank you very much.